I was 16 when my parents decided to spend New Year's Eve in the mountains. They'd found a cozy cabin on some rental site, isolated, wrapped in pines with big glass windows looking out over the snow. They thought it would be a great escape from the city, a chance to unplug and reconnect as a family. I wasn't thrilled. I had friends, plans, things I'd rather be doing than sitting in the woods with my parents, but they didn't ask. They just packed the car and told me to bring a book. The drive up was long. The highways turned to winding roads, the roads to narrow tracks lined with frost-covered trees. The further we went, the more the snow piled up, clinging to the branches and blanketing the world in a muffled white. My mom kept snapping pictures through the windshield and my dad hummed along to old songs on the radio. I sat in the back, earbuds in, trying to lose myself in whatever music could drown out the sound of my own boredom. When we finally reached the cabin, it was late afternoon. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the yard. The cabin was smaller than it looked in the pictures, a dark, wood-paneled box with a wraparound porch and a smoking chimney. The air was sharp and cold as I stepped out of the car, my boots sinking into the fresh snow. My breath fogged up, and for a moment I felt something close to peace. Inside, the cabin was warm, smelling of wood and old fabric. My mom set to work unpacking groceries, and my dad fiddled with the fireplace. I dropped my bag in the small bedroom at the back, the one with a window looking out into the forest. The glass was fogged, but through the haze, I could see the trees, their black trunks twisted and gnarled. We settled in quickly. Dinner was simple, canned soup and grilled cheese, and by the time darkness fell, the cabin felt cozy and safe. I almost forgot how annoyed I'd been about coming here. Almost. The next morning we hit the slopes. I'd never been much of a skier, but my parents had signed me up for lessons when I was younger, so I could manage well enough to keep up. The resort wasn't crowded, just a few families and a group of snowboarders who looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog. The snow was packed tight under our skis, the air biting at my cheeks. After a few runs, my parents decided to grab lunch at the lodge. I wasn't hungry, so I told them I'd take one more run on my own. They hesitated, my mom always did, but eventually waved me off with the promise to meet up at the bottom. I took a different trail, one that curved through a thicket of trees. It was quieter there, the sounds of the resort fading behind me. The snow muffled everything, and all I could hear was the rush of my own breath and the soft whoosh of my skis cutting through the frost. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear, a massive, dark shape moving slowly through the trees to my right. I slowed down, my poles digging into the snow, my heart knocking against my ribs. Bears were rare this time of year, weren't they? Shouldn't they be hibernating? But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a bear. The creature stood on two legs, its body hunched and twisted. Thick, matted fur covered its form, but in patches, the fur was missing, revealing black, leathery skin beneath. The exposed skin looked raw and cracked, like old leather left in the sun too long. Its limbs were long and thin, ending in clawed hands that hung loosely at its sides. Its head was the worst part. The face was mostly hidden under tangled hair, but through the strands I caught glimpses of dark, sunken eyes and a mouth that seemed too wide, too full of crooked, yellowed teeth. It had no expression, just a slack, empty look like it wasn't really seeing anything. I stood frozen, my breath sharp in my throat. The creature moved slowly, its head turning as if searching for something. For a brief, gut-twisting moment, I thought it was looking at me, but its eyes slid past, unfocused. I don't know how long I stood there, my body locked in place by some primal fear. Eventually, the creature lumbered deeper into the woods, its form blending with the shadows. I waited until I couldn't see it anymore, then forced my legs to move, my skis scraping clumsily over the snow. By the time I reached the bottom of the trail, my parents were already waiting, their faces creased with irritation. I mumbled an apology, made up something about losing track of time. I didn't tell them about the creature. I didn't know how to. I thought maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, a shadow that looked wrong, a trick of the light. I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. And it wasn't a shadow. That night, the cabin felt different. The cozy warmth from the day before had turned stale, the air too still, too heavy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the knot in my stomach refusing to loosen. My parents had gone to bed hours ago, their soft murmurs fading into sleep behind the thin walls. I could hear the old radiator ticking, the occasional pop of the logs settling in the fireplace. I hadn't said a word about what I'd seen. I wanted to. I'd opened my mouth at dinner, pushing peas around my plate, but nothing came out. How could I even begin? Hey Mom, Dad, I saw a creature in the woods today. Not a bear, something else. It sounded stupid, even in my head. I tossed and turned, the blankets twisting around my legs. The cabin had a bathroom just down the hall, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left the bed, something would be waiting for me in the dark. Something with long, clawed hands and eyes that didn't quite focus. Eventually, my bladder won the battle over my fear. I slid out of bed, my feet hitting the cold wooden floor. I wrapped myself in the blanket, more for comfort than warmth, and edged the bedroom door open. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the kitchen window. The door to my parents' room was shut, their soft snores a low, comforting hum. I moved slowly, my bare feet soundless on the floorboards. The bathroom was small, with an old porcelain sink and a shower curtain patterned with faded blue flowers. I shut the door behind me, locking it out of habit. The light buzzed overhead, throwing harsh shadows against the pale walls. I finished up quickly, eager to get back to my bed where the blankets could create a barrier between me and the dark. I turned off the light and opened the door, and that's when I saw it. It was at the window, its face pressed against the glass. I froze. Every muscle in my body turned to stone. Its eyes were level with mine, wide and empty, the same dark, sunken pits I'd seen in the woods. Its skin, where the fur had torn away, was black and cracked, the texture of burnt wood. The creature's mouth hung open, and in the dim light I could see rows of uneven, yellowed teeth. Its breath fogged up the glass in slow, steady puffs. I don't know how long we stood like that, me in the doorway, it on the other side of the glass. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, to fit this thing into some category that made sense. A mask? A prank? My own tired eyes playing tricks on me? But there was nothing human in the way it moved, its head tilting slightly as if listening to a sound just out of reach. Its fingers, too long, with nails that scraped against the glass, tapped rhythmically, an almost curious motion. I screamed. It wasn't a conscious decision. The sound tore out of me, raw and sharp, shattering the silence of the cabin. My parents' door flew open, and their footsteps thundered down the hall. My dad grabbed me by the shoulders, shaking me hard enough to rattle my teeth. What is it? What happened? The window. It was at the window. I choked out, my eyes darting back to the glass. But it was gone. My mom flicked on the lights, flooding the room with harsh, fluorescent clarity. Outside, the snow lay undisturbed, a smooth, unbroken canvas. The trees stood silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. There was no sign of anything, no footprints, no smudges on the glass. It was there, I whispered, my voice cracking. I saw it. My dad's face shifted from fear to something colder, disappointment, maybe. My mom pulled me into a hug, but her hands trembled and her heartbeat thudded unevenly against my cheek. You had a nightmare, she said gently. It's okay. It happens. It wasn't a nightmare, I insisted, but the words felt weak, even to me. My dad led me back to my room, sitting on the edge of my bed until my breathing slowed. He didn't say much, just patted my shoulder and left the door cracked open behind him. I lay there, eyes wide, staring at the window across the room. I couldn't see outside from this angle, but I could imagine it, the glass, cold and fogged with breath, and the creature waiting just beyond. I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay awake, listening to every creak and shift of the cabin, waiting for the soft tap of nails against the glass. But nothing came. The next day, I felt like a ghost. My body moved through the motions, breakfast, bundling up for the slopes, smiling when my mom aimed her phone at me, but my mind stayed in that hallway, locked in the moment I'd seen the creature's face at the window. My parents didn't mention it. I think they hoped ignoring it would make it go away. My dad was extra cheerful, cracking jokes and planning our day down to the minute. My mom hovered, offering me hot chocolate and asking if I felt okay. I nodded along, too tired to argue. We spent the day skiing again. My parents stuck to the beginner trails, but I couldn't bring myself to go off on my own this time. The image of the creature in the woods clung to me, every shadow between the trees morphing into hunched shapes with clawed hands and sunken eyes. By the afternoon, I was worn out. My legs ached and my vision swam every time I turned too fast. My dad suggested calling it a day, and I didn't argue. I just wanted to go back to the cabin, bury myself in blankets, and sleep until this whole trip was over. When we got back, the cabin was dark. My mom flipped on the lights, and I flinched at the harshness of it. I went straight to the shower, letting the hot water scald my skin, trying to scrub away the cold that seemed to have settled in my bones. After dinner, my parents sat down with a board game. I declined, my excuse a headache they didn't question. I needed air. The cabin felt too small, the walls too close. I slipped out onto the balcony, closing the door softly behind me. The night had settled in fully, and the world outside was a deep, quiet blue. Snow clung to the trees, and the sky was clear, stars scattered like glass shards. My breath clouded in front of me, and I wrapped my arms around myself, the chill sinking through my sweater. I tried to focus on the beauty of it. The quiet, the isolation. I could almost convince myself that nothing was wrong, that I was just a normal kid on a normal vacation, that my parents were inside laughing over a silly board game, that there was nothing in the woods but animals and snow. But then I saw it. It was standing at the edge of the trees, half hidden among the trunks. The creature. Its head poked out from behind a pine, the rest of its body lost in shadow. Its eyes, those dark, empty pits, were locked on me. Even from this distance, I could see the way its chest rose and fell, the slow, deliberate rhythm of its breathing. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I stumbled backward, hitting the door with a dull thud. My hands fumbled for the handle and I slipped inside, the warmth of the cabin slamming into me. "Mom! Dad!" I called, my voice cracking. They appeared from the living room, my mom clutching a half-empty glass of wine, my dad with the board game box under his arm. "It's outside," I gasped. "It's out there, by the trees." My dad's expression fell, his patience wearing thin. "Not this again. I'm serious." I ran to the window, pointing. It was there. It was watching me. My mom hesitated, setting her glass down. "Maybe it was a deer, honey. Or a raccoon. You know how your mind can play tricks when it's dark." "No. I know what I saw." I pushed the curtain aside, my breath fogging the glass. But there was nothing. Just the empty yard, the snow undisturbed, the trees standing silent and still. My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "You need sleep. You've been out in the cold too long. It's making you see things." I wanted to scream, to shake them, to make them understand. But their faces were closed off, their concern already slipping into exasperation. "Fine," I muttered. "I'll go to bed." They exchanged a look, some silent agreement that I was just overtired, a kid spooked by the dark. I stomped down the hall, slamming my bedroom door behind me. I didn't go to bed. I sat by the window, knees pulled to my chest, staring out into the night. I could still feel its eyes on me, a weight pressing against the glass. But I didn't see it again. Not that night. The next day, my parents insisted I needed fresh air. "You can't stay cooped up in here," my mom said, her voice thin and tight. "It's not healthy." I wanted to argue, to tell them that outside was the last place I wanted to be, but I didn't. I could see it in their faces, the weariness, the forced smiles. They were trying. They thought I was losing it, and maybe I was. But I needed them on my side, so I put on my ski gear, forced a smile, and followed them back to the slopes. The day was bright, sunlight bouncing off the snow and making everything too sharp, too vivid. My parents signed up for a guided trail, but I stayed on the beginner slopes, weaving slowly through the churned-up snow. I kept my distance from the tree line, my eyes darting over every shadow, every patch of darkness between the trunks. The hours crawled by. I managed to keep my nerves under control, pushing away the thoughts of dark eyes and clawed fingers. I focused on the rhythm of skiing, the crunch of snow under my skis, the way my breath clouded in front of me, the soft chatter of families and couples around me. But by the afternoon, the crowds started thinning. The sky turned gray and a biting wind rolled in. I told myself I'd do one more run, just one, and then I'd go back to the lodge and wait for my parents. I took the lift up, shivering as the wind cut through my jacket. The slope was almost empty, just a few figures moving in the distance. The trees loomed closer here, the trail narrower, winding between snow-laden branches. I started down, my movements slower than before. The snow felt different, looser, less predictable. My skis wobbled and I had to fight to stay upright. I told myself to focus, to keep my knees bent, my weight forward. And then I saw it. The creature was at the edge of the trail, half hidden behind a snowbank. It stood on two legs, its body hunched, shoulders too broad, arms hanging low. Patches of fur were missing, exposing the cracked, black skin beneath. Its mouth hung open, a wet, shivering maw filled with those awful, uneven teeth. I panicked. I yanked my skis to the side, trying to turn away, but the snow gave under me. My legs twisted, the skis crossing, and I felt a sharp, sickening pop in my knee. The world flipped. I tumbled down the slope, snow and sky swapping places in a blur. My body hit hard, the breath crushed from my lungs. Pain bloomed in my leg, sharp and burning. When I finally stopped, I was on my back, half buried in a drift. Snow filled my mouth, my nose. I spit it out, gasping, the cold biting into my skin. The world was quiet. The slope above me was empty, no skiers, no creature. Just me, alone, the woods pressing in around me. I tried to move, but my legs screamed in protest. My vision swam, dark spots creeping in at the edges. I fumbled for my phone, my gloved fingers clumsy and numb. No service. Help. I croaked, my voice swallowed by the wind. I lay there for what felt like hours. The cold seeped into me, my fingers going stiff, my lips numb. I thought about my parents, about how mad I'd been at them, how they looked at me like I was some broken thing. And then I saw it. The creature stood at the top of the hill, its silhouette sharp against the gray sky. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just watched me, its head cocked as if waiting. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to see anymore. Eventually, voices broke through the quiet. Rough hands pulled me from the snow, warm blankets wrapped around me. I opened my eyes to see strangers in ski jackets, their faces creased with concern. "Are you okay?" one of them asked. I couldn't answer. I just stared up at the slope, at the empty spot where the creature had been. They got me to the medical center, my legs strapped into a brace. The doctor said something about torn ligaments, about needing crutches and rest. My parents showed up, their faces pale, my mom crying. "I told you," I whispered when they sat by my bed. "I told you it was real." My dad shook his head, his hand cold against mine. "There was nothing there. You must have hit your head." I wanted to argue, but the words turned to ash in my mouth. I was too tired, too broken. I let them take me back to the cabin. I swallowed the painkillers they offered and closed my eyes, hoping sleep would pull me away from the dark, from the eyes I could still feel watching me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. I woke up to the soft hum of voices. My room was dim, the curtains pulled tight against the pale morning light. My leg throbbed under the blankets, a dull, rhythmic ache that matched the pounding in my head. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The cabin walls seemed to close in on me, the wood grain twisting into shapes that made my stomach lurch. I blinked hard and everything snapped back into place, the accident, the medical center, the blank faces of my parents as I whispered about the creature. I sat up slowly, my leg heavy and wrapped in bandages. Someone had propped my crutches against the wall, my ski jacket draped over the back of a chair. The room felt too warm, the air thick and stale. I pushed the blankets off and forced myself to stand, the crutches awkward under my arms. When I shuffled into the living room, my parents were packing. My mom was folding blankets, her eyes red and puffy. My dad was by the door, wrestling with a duffel bag that refused to zip. "Hey, kiddo," he said when he saw me. His voice was too bright, too forced. "We thought we'd get an early start. Beat the traffic." I nodded, the motion making my vision tilt. "Yeah. Okay." My mom crossed the room and put her hands on my shoulders. "How are you feeling? Do you need anything before we go?" "No. I'm fine." The words felt heavy in my mouth. I want to go home." Her face crumpled, a fresh wave of guilt washing over me. I knew they thought this was their fault, that maybe they'd pushed me too hard, brought me out here when I wasn't ready. They didn't know the real reason, and I didn't have the energy to explain it again. The next half hour blurred by. My parents moved through the cabin like ghosts, their voices soft, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. I sat on the couch, my crutches leaning against my good leg, and watched the world outside the window. The snow had stopped, leaving everything draped in a heavy, white silence. The trees stood still, their branches sagging under the weight of ice. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting. Eventually, my dad called out that the car was ready. My mom helped me to my feet, her hands cool against my skin. We moved slowly, the crutches slipping on the hardwood floor. When we stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap, sharp and clean. The car was packed tight, our suitcases wedged into the trunk. My dad had already cleared the snow off the windshield, but frost still rimmed the windows, delicate patterns of ice that melted when I breathed on them. I slid into the back seat, my leg propped up on a pile of blankets. My mom tucked me in, smoothing the edges of the quilt around me. I didn't have the heart to tell her I wasn't a kid anymore, that I didn't need to be tucked in. I just let her do it, closing my eyes and pretending I was somewhere else. The engine rumbled to life, and the car eased down the driveway, tires crunching over packed snow. I opened my eyes as we pulled away from the cabin, the porch light shrinking to a pinprick behind us. For a few minutes, everything was normal. My dad fiddled with the radio, my mom murmured something about stopping for breakfast. I watched the world slip by outside, the snow-draped trees and the empty road. But then I saw it. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. A shadow between the trees, a shape that didn't quite fit. But as we rounded a bend, it came into view and my stomach turned to ice. The creature stood among the trees, its body half hidden behind a snowbank. Its head was tilted, those empty, ink-black eyes fixed on me. Its skin was a patchwork of fur and raw, dark flesh, and its breath misted in the cold air, each exhale slow and deliberate. I didn't make a sound. I didn't move. I was 16 when my parents decided to spend New Year's Eve in the mountains. They'd found a cozy cabin on some rental site, isolated, wrapped in pines, with big glass windows looking out over the snow. They thought it would be a great escape from the city, a chance to unplug and reconnect as a family. I wasn't thrilled. I had friends, plans, things I'd rather be doing than sitting in the woods with my parents, but they didn't ask. They just packed the car and told me to bring a book. The drive up was long. The highways turned to winding roads, the roads to